Right, good afternoon everyone. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm most impressed with all the work that goes on in the background of the club these days. Anyway, Jude asked me if I would give you the genesis story, the creation of the Honda Owners Club. Well, we have to go back 60 years, as you know. And just a little bit of background on me. I started riding when I was 16. In those days, you didn't have to go through any tests, or you didn't even have to wear a safety helmet. You could ride a bike of any capacity. And I started on a 98cc Excelsior and moved up to a 500cc AGS, all on L plates. Then I passed the test and my thoughts turned to something a little bit more racing. One day, I left the bank where I was working in Wigan, bank clerk, and I walked along Scholes and saw Foster's motorcycles, and in the window was a Honda Bentley CB92 Super Sports. Of course, I was smitten. I was completely in love. I had to have it. So, within a week, my long-suffering parents had been persuaded to sign a hire purchase agreement for £225. Now, this is a huge amount of money. It was nearly a year's salary. I was earning £20 a month and £4.50 a week. And so they signed this contract, and within a few days I was riding off on the Bentley Super Sports. Now, cast your mind back. Well, very few of you can do this, but those who can, cast your mind back to 1961. And it was a completely different world, of course. It was 16 years after the end of the war in Japan. We'd seen no Japanese consumer products in this country, really, apart from the odd camera. And motorcycles were completely new. Honda had just started, and my CB92, I think, was one of the first of those bikes in this country. There was quite a lot of opposition to anyone who had the cheek to use a Japanese consumer product. People, I noticed in Lancashire where I lived, people would shake their fists as you went round the corner because they saw a Japanese product, and of course most men over 30 had been in the war. And they had, in some cases, fought in Japan or fought in the Far East. And so Japanese products were very unpopular. And there was another aspect to this. Owners of British bikes, the traditional older motorcyclists, were very anti-Honda because it was something completely new, something rather technical. It didn't leak. And you didn't need a drip tray under your bike in the garage every evening. So there was a lot of anti-publicity about Hondas. And I decided that I would try to do something about that. So I started writing letters to the motorcycle press and got them published. In those days, there were two major publications: Motorcycle, which had a blue cover, and Motorcycling, with a green cover. They came out every Thursday, and most motorcyclists would buy them. Motorcycle News had started a little earlier in 1958, but was still a fairly small publication. But anyway, the two major magazines, Motorcycle and Motorcycling, were the ones everyone read. And I got letters published in them defending Honda and saying really they're not as bad as these people say. And one day I decided I would like to get together with some Honda owners. So I wrote to the editor of Motorcycle and asked if he would publicise a proposed meeting in Wigan, where I lived. And we met in the Market Tavern in Wigan sometime in the early part of 1961. Can't remember the exact date. And about 20 people turned up, 20 motorcyclists. So we thought we were the only ones. We decided we would form the Honda Owners Club Great Britain. We decided on a rather ambitious title rather than Wigan. So we thought we were the only ones, but arising from that meeting, I started getting letters from other people around the country who had already started groups of Honda motorcyclists, including, of course, Goodger, who of course was one of the oldest members of the club. He had started a group in Horsham, where he lived. There was a group in London, run by the guy whose name I've forgotten, but I do remember going down on the CB92 and meeting everyone. And there was a group in Birmingham, run by Norman and his mother. Can't remember his surname. But anyway, that's a long time ago now, and I've got an excuse, I suppose. But we got together as a national club very quickly. There was no turf wars. We all got on very well, and I was elected General Secretary of the Honda Owners Club GB. And we went on from there, from strength to strength. I rode with CB92 down to the Woburn rally of the Federation of National One-Make Motorcycle Clubs, FNOMC, and we affiliated ourselves to them in 1961. That then became the BMF, of course, and I think you've probably been a member of the BMF now for all of those 60 years. Anyway, it was my career really took off from the start of the Honda Owners Club. As a result of the work I'd done for the club and the letters I'd written, one day I got a letter from the editor of the motorcycle magazine in London, Harry Louis. Would I like a job? Or would I like to come down for an interview? So I got on the milk train one morning and went down, one Saturday morning, went down to Dorset House in Stamford Street, London, and met Harry Louis. I was then introduced to Arthur Bourne, who was the former editor, who'd been editor of Motorcycle in the 1930s. And Arthur sat back in his chair. He was a very impressive personage. Sat back in his chair, lit his pipe, gave a few puffs. He said, "I think we'll give you a gallop, old boy." And I was employed at the princely sum of £8 a week. So on that, with that contract in my pocket, I packed all my belongings on the back of the Bentley Super Sport and took myself off to London, where I lodged for 10 shillings a week, bed and breakfast in Muswell Hill. That's 10 shillings a week, 50 pence for a week. Sorry, yes, that's right, very cheap. So I then joined the world of motorcycling, which I've been connected with really for the rest of my life. It really set off my career. I could talk all afternoon about my experiences on the motorcycle magazine. I met some wonderful people. I met almost everyone who was anyone in the world of motorcycling, from Edward Turner through to, for instance, I met a guy called the Canon B.H. Davis, who had written a column in Motorcycle under the pseudonym of Ixion. For 60 years. He started in 1903, and he'd written every week a 2-page column in Motorcycle. And I met him. That was going back 60 years from when I started the club. And now here we are, 60 years on from that, so we spanned 120 years there. I had some wonderful years as a journalist, testing bikes. I was given all the Japanese bikes. The rest of the staff really wanted to test only the British bikes. So I got most of the Japanese stuff. I wrote features, organised various events, and on the strength of what I'd done as a journalist, I decided to start a PR company, which I did in 1968. And that was the company that went on to specialise in motorcycling. We handled the motorcycle industry's public relations for over 25 years. I was the chief press officer of all national motorcycle shows at Earls Court and at the NEC for those 25 years. We formed through the industry, we formed the Institute of Motorcycling, which was a sort of pseudo-independent body aimed at promoting the interests of motorcycling. We got together with the various groups in the industry. We formed the National Motorcycle Council, bringing together MAG and BMF and all the RACAA and all the other interested stakeholders in the motorcycle world. And we fought the legislation. There was always a lot of legislation, including the possibility of leg guards for motorcycles, for instance, and the increasing burden of training. From when I was young, where you could just get on a bike of any size, we started having restrictions, first of all 250, then helmets came in, and then we got the various testing regimes. It seems difficult to believe now that there was no training and very little support for young riders 60 years ago. But of course, within 10 years, that had all changed, and towards the end of the century, we got a tremendous increase in red tape and legislation, which I think, if it hadn't been for the industry, with its publicity machine and fighting the legislation that came along, it could well have killed off motorcycling completely. And of course now we're facing problems with IC engines and electric motorcycles, and this goes on, and that's why I think it's so important that everyone in clubs and everywhere in the motorcycle industry gets together and has one voice to approach government. So I had a super career, and it was entirely, I think, on the basis of having started the Honda Owners Club. Had I not started the Honda Owners Club in Wigan and met with the other people around the country, then probably I would still have been living in Lancashire. I'd probably have been a bank manager, retired, and I wouldn't have had the sort of interesting life that I have had over the last 60 years. So here we are at 60. And it's quite incredible, really, to think that the club that I was partly responsible for starting all those years ago is still in operation, and is still doing such wonderful work in legislation and in looking after the interests of its members, and has such a strong social life. Excuse me reading notes, but I've reached an age where I need notes. In practice, though, although I've talked a lot about my career, my direct association with the club was just 2 or 3 years. The reason for that was because as I joined a motorcycle magazine, I had to be impartial, and it wasn't possible in those days for me to have 2 hats, so I had to give up my association with the club and concentrate more on the general motorcycle industry. But I'm very proud to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here and to see such a vibrant organisation. Also, you have to look at the work that's been put in by people in the club who started more or less the same time that I did, but stayed with the club throughout their lives, including Pete Goodger, who devoted his life to the club. And we have other members here today, like Michael Vonner, Graham Goll, and Dave Andrews, who've been in almost from the beginning and have done their best to make this club the success that it has been. So there we are. A classic club in every sense of the word, and I'm a real classic now, and I'm glad to see that you've now got a classic dating service, because that sounds very interesting. Anyway, thank you to everyone, and let's look forward to a century of the Honda Owners Club. And you can be glad that this speech comes only once every 10 years.